Welcome to this episode of Parallel Times. Today I'll be interviewing Brianne Bernsen. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly, Brianne?
You are. It's Brianne. It's a
Brianne.
hard
Okay.
at the end. Yeah.
Brianne. I don't think I've known a Brianne before. So I'll be interviewing Brianne Bernsen, who's the founder of Plum Fabulous Foods, which is a micro farm on a homestead in Plum, Texas. And at Plum Fabulous Foods, they grow 3,000 pounds of food a year on a tenth of an acre. It's actually a little less than a tenth of an acre, isn't it?
Yes.
And Brianne also homeschools her 6 children while she's doing all of this. So welcome, Brianne, and thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really excited to chat with you. So I met Brianne when she presented at John and Rebecca Bush's Exit and Build Land Conference in Bastrop, Texas in May of 2023. And Brianne, I really wanted to talk to you because this is what so many people are feeling that they need to do or want to do, what you and your husband have done. And so they can learn from your experience because you've been doing this for, I understand, about 15 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And Brianne started this process in 2009. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Oh, probably 2007, actually.
2007. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then she's learned through trial and error, and she's poured a lot of what she knows into this book, which I purchased at, let's see, make sure that you can see it, which I purchased at the Exit and Build Land seminar, which is called The Plum Fabulous Guide to Gardening, which is just amazing. It's like she's giving you those 15 years of experience so that we don't all have to learn as much by trial and error as she did. So it's quite gracious of her actually to hand over that much information. And in this book, she shares generously to expedite everyone's learning curve. And we're going to be talking today about Brianne's experiences and some tips for others who want to grow bountiful, healthy food. And Brianne, will you say and spell your website for us, for the folks who are just listening to an audio tape?
Sure. It's www.plumfabulousfoods. So Plum, Plum, Fabulous, Fabulous, and Foods, Foods.com.
Great.
And you can find all kinds of articles on there, a link to our YouTube.
Yeah, I was impressed that you have so much free information, education. Mm-hmm. You have that whole series on preserving and fermenting, and it's all free. So I definitely encourage people to go and look at what's on the website because it's a great resource. And you can also buy the book there, correct? Is that right, Brianne?
You can't. So we're very small scale. And if you go to the contact me page on the website and just shoot me a message, then we take care of handling the book. We still snail mail them, and we accept payment online. And so we take care of it through there.
Great. Thank you. And I think you mentioned something about wanting to publish through a publisher, but I have to say I love this format because the spiral bound makes it easy. Like if you wanted to have this in your garden.
And actually it's all printed on a laser jet so that if the pages get wet, if you have it in the garden and the pages get wet, they're not going to run. And so it's an extra cost to the printing. We do all the printing and binding ourselves. My printing crew is 6 and 11 and 14. And they do a great job. And so, yeah.
And throughout this interview as well, I'm going to be dropping in some photos from Brianne's book, as well as some other images that she just provided to me. So that'll be a little eye candy so you know what we're talking about as we go. So I'm going to jump in. Okay. So I understand you can grow year round where you live in Texas, which is uncommon in many parts of the U.S.
Yeah.
But fall is typically an important harvest season. I imagine that's true for you too, even though you grow year round. So can you tell us a little bit about what you and your family grew this year and what you're most excited about in terms of your results and your yield?
Sure. So we do harvest year round. You asked earlier, like what we're harvesting right now. I can tell you I picked over 100 pounds of squash in the last 2 weeks. So there's a
Wow.
lot of things. We just had our first little micro freeze, and so we lost a lot of our. We have 2 summer plantings and 2 fall plantings, really, and so we lost a lot of our spring stuff. But just real quick, I'm going to read the list of the 33 different crops we grow a year round here. So bush beans, beets, broccoli, bok choy, cabbage, cauliflower, carrots, corn, cucumber, cantaloupe, eggplant, all kinds of herbs, garlic, leeks, kale, kohlrabi, onions, okra, peas, lettuce, peanuts, peppers, potatoes, radishes, sweet potatoes, summer squash, strawberries, Swiss chard, tomatoes, turnips, watermelon, winter squash, and spinach. And that is in addition to any of the fruit trees that we have. And then we also raise 150 meat birds a year, and we have about 30 laying hens that we have
Wow.
year round as well. So I always try to encourage people in the idea of food resiliency. You don't have to be the person that does everything, but you have to pick a couple key areas and then know people that do. And so
Hmm.
we don't do bees and we don't do cows, but I know lots of people that do. And so it's really easy to barter with them because not very many people do the vegetables.
Hmm.
And chickens are also something that not a whole lot of people do. So
Hmm.
in Texas, everybody has cows. So it's really easy to find somebody that's raising beef and trade with them.
That's really interesting
Mhm.
about what's common down there and what's not as common down there.
Yeah.
But that
Some
seems
people,
like that's
you,
that's really I want to underscore these key points for people as
yeah,
you mention them because they drop like gold,
yeah,
these key takeaways. And so that
yeah,
idea that you don't have to do
right.
everything
Hmm.
could reduce some of the overwhelm. And the
Yes,
idea that you
yes.
want to find a
Hmm.
niche that's really needed in your area so that you can barter. Those are both so helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's always easier to do something that you're passionate about. And so I'm really passionate about vegetables. We eat a mostly vegetarian diet with meat added. I say we're like meat eating vegetarians.
Hmm.
And it's because vegetables are the most the easiest to produce year round with as few outside inputs. If I could
Hmm.
grow my own corn feed, I mean a chicken feed, which maybe I could if I really tried. I've tried and I haven't been successful. But if I could do that, then maybe I wouldn't focus so much on the vegetables. I would just do chickens. But really, vegetables is the easiest thing to learn how to do, and it produces year round, and you get such a variety. I mean,
Hmm.
we couldn't just live on chickens, if we couldn't find somebody to barter with. And so I love the diversity of the fruits and vegetables.
That's wonderful and great. Great tip. And I like that idea of being vegetarians that eat some meat.
Yeah.
Seems very practical. So I love the story in your book about how and why you started growing food. So can you give
Yeah.
us sort of the nutshell version of that story so that I'm sure
Yes.
people can relate?
Yeah. So one of the things I always try to convince people is that they don't have to grow up gardening because so
Hmm.
many things you feel like you have to have this background knowledge in it, and you really don't with gardening. Um, we decided to be a stay at home. I was going to be a stay at home mom and start raising our children and homeschooling them. So we went
Hmm.
from 2 incomes to 1 income overnight. And in that process, I was looking for ways to reduce our grocery bill. And at the same time, we live in a very small rural Texas town that didn't have a whole lot of organic offerings at the grocery store. And I wanted to make all of our own baby food. And so
Hmm.
I went to the library and I got a book. And unfortunately, I got a great book to get me started in gardening. It was organic based methods. It's called the Vegetable Gardener's Bible. And
Hmm.
we started with 2 little beds in our city backyard. And I started just raising vegetables in those 2 little beds. And I just had no idea how much I was going to love it. Like there's
Hmm.
no better feeling. I really feel like we were created to grow our own food because I don't think there's many things in life that will bring you as much joy as producing your own food.
Hmm.
It's hard to explain until you've had the opportunity to do it. And I had no idea I would enjoy it so much. And we started having more children, and we knew we were going to have to move to the country. And when we did, the first thing we did was build a bigger garden.
Hmm.
And uh, so I didn't have any background in it. Everything I've learned from reading books and just applying it. I am a student of gardening. And so I am always keeping notes and looking for ways to improve it, but it's all trial and error,
Hmm.
100%.
Okay, that's great. And that's kind of a lead in. I saw a theme in your book, if you will, which was about soil, like
Yeah.
all the iterations and the
Mhm.
evolution of how you have created, accessed, purchased, um, transformed
Mhm.
soil. So can you tell us, I mean, and maybe this sounds like the obvious, but I think it bears repeating. I've heard people say that the earth biome is like the human biome, our gut
Mhm.
is like the earth biome is the soil.
Mhm.
And so can you tell us a little bit about the importance of having good soil to being successful as a gardener or farmer, and also what good soil is?
Sure. I'll try to keep it a simple answer, but you say it may seem obvious, but I don't think it is. I don't
Hmm.
think it is enough to people that it is so obvious. Like I said, I was very lucky to get started in an organic approach. So it was a no-till approach, and it was all about building good soil from the beginning. And when we moved here to Plum, I read another book, the New Square Foot Gardening book by Mel Bartholomew. And in it, he had this theory that he wanted to develop a system that he could bring anywhere in the world, like Africa or India or someplace that had these terrible soil conditions, and have a successful garden. And unbeknownst to me, when we moved to Plum, we moved to an area that had terrible soil. It is thick, black gumbo clay.
Hmm.
It's so hard that when we had our fiber line put in, the ditch digger couldn't dig through the clay. It was too hard.
Wow. It's
And
like
so,
our caliche in New
yes,
Mexico.
yeah. And so, uh, and just hearing that idea of building the system that could be used anywhere was so appealing to me. And so we've never tilled ever since we've been here, because in reading the Vegetable Gardener's Bible, I understood that there was this world going on underneath the soil, even though I didn't understand much about it. And so we always knew to go up and to build healthy soil above the ground. And so everybody knows there's all sorts of methods and theories out there in gardening. And so gardening's been around for a really long time, right? Like
Hmm.
a long time. And you would think in all those years that we would have this best practices system identified. And we really don't. We
Hmm.
really have all these various things that people can do. And, one of the trends now is to have like the hydroponics or the grow light systems, and the things that you are growing plants where you just have the light and you have the water, and then you're adding chemicals and nutrients into it. So plants obviously need water and sunlight. Okay. So, what is it that they're getting from the soil that's so important? And what they're getting is all these micronutrients. So, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all these micronutrients and minerals that the plants need to grow. And if you grow something on a piece of land, those plants are going to take all those micronutrients and minerals out of the soil, and you have to be able to put it back in the soil in order for it to produce a crop the next year, because the next
Hmm.
plants you put on that soil are going to have to take up these nutrients. Well, how do you put that back? In conventional agriculture, you use chemical fertilizers because they're cheap and easy to produce. And obviously, in the organic world, we don't want to do that. So, what do we have to do? We put compost on the soil. It's all
Hmm.
about compost. And what is compost? Compost is plants and animals that have broken down. And when they break down, what you're left with are those micronutrients and minerals that your plants are going to need to grow again. Okay. All the nutrients we have in the world right now is the same we started with thousands of years ago. It's not like the world's creating new nutrients and stuff. We have a limited amount. And so you're constantly recycling them.
Hmm.
And so when you take plants out of your garden, when you take grass clippings and leaves and mulch and all those things, and you put it together in a compost bin, and it breaks down and it makes compost, you take that and you put it back into your soil, and that's what grows healthy plants. And so it's all about the soil.
Hmm. Well, thank you. I know you could probably do like a whole 20-hour course just on soil with what your experiences have been. So
Yeah.
thank you for attempting to consolidate that a little bit for us. And so that first garden that you had back in 2007,
Mhm.
2009. That was based on the New Square Foot Gardener, that book you just mentioned by
Mhm.
Mel Bartholomew, I
Correct.
believe.
Uh-huh.
And that soil, it looks like you started with a third compost, a third
Mhm.
vermiculite, and a third topsoil. And if
It's
I
peat,
believe
peat moss. Peat
peat
moss,
moss, okay,
vermiculite, and compost.
peat moss,
Mhm.
vermiculite, and compost,
Yes, ma'am.
okay. And you purchased those items,
I
correct?
did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how many beds did you have for that first garden? Like how much, what was the
Yeah.
square footage at first? And do you have a rough sense of what the cost of that was for that approach?
We do, yeah. So I've always kept really good notes through all my gardening because, like I said, I'm a student of gardening. And so when we started that first garden, we had 4 beds, and it cost over $700 to build these 4 beds. They were each about 4 foot by 8 foot, and then we had 2 beds that were 4 by 8, and 2 beds that were 4 by 16, so 4 by 12 on average. And it
Mm-hmm.
cost over $750 to fill those 4 beds.
Okay.
Yeah,
So a lot of that was the soil cost then.
oh, a huge part of it. And then at that time
Okay.
also we were building the frames on the beds. And so when we
Mm-hmm.
did a raised bed, we had the wooden frames
The
around it
wood.
as well. So that was quite a bit of an added cost. Yeah.
Right. And so, what were the benefits and the challenges of that approach? Because I know a lot of people talk about doing raised beds, and it's
Mhm,
interesting to me that you started with that and then you've gone
mhm.
away from that. So,
Yeah,
pros and cons, curious.
sure. So some of the pros are that you can plant in it right away, like that day.
Hmm.
Another pro is that you can go buy all the components. And for some people that's a blessing. So they
Hmm.
want to be able to go to the store and buy all this stuff instead of waiting to create it themselves. Um, some of the cons, it was very light, and so because of the vermiculite and the peat moss, it was a very light soil, and I feel like we lost some of it due to wind erosion.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and we get these great big cracks in our clay soil, and I swear some of it's like gone away into these cracks. And it's really funny because they always say that you can amend soils if you're there long enough and you put all this organic matter onto your soil that you can amend it. And that has not been true in my case because if
Hmm.
you dig down 6 inches in our garden, you hit solid clay. And it has not
Okay.
changed at all in the 12 years that we've been gardening here in Plum. So
Okay.
I
So
really
good
am a firm
to know.
believer in going up. No matter where you're at, just build up with good soil.
Hmm. So so it sounds like that's interesting that you invested all this money in it and then you felt like you lost some of your precious soil
Yeah.
because it blew away.
Hmm.
If you live somewhere like in Albuquerque where I live or anywhere in this area, we have these huge winds in the
Yeah.
spring. And so you
Hmm.
could literally like watch all that money blow out
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to do that. Okay, so good to know. And then what was your harvest like with that soil, with that system, in terms of quantity and quality?
It was beautiful soil. It really did produce great plants. And so the compost is what's feeding the plants. The
Mm-hmm.
peat moss and the vermiculite, their function is just to retain water. And
Okay,
so
both of
it,
them.
uh-huh.
Good to
And
know.
so it was a soil that it had a consistent moisture content. It really did grow great stuff. I don't have, I mean, I could go through my books and tell you the exact amount that we were growing at that time, but uh, it's comparable to what we're doing now. And
Okay.
what we have discovered now is that we get if you take overall garden square footage. So if you
Hmm.
had a garden that was 30 by 50, if you take that overall square footage and
Mm-hmm.
multiply it, so you'd have 1,500 square feet,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll get about 1,500 pounds of vegetables a year,
Oh, wow.
following our methods and planted intentionally.
Okay, so it's about a pound per square foot
That's correct. But
of
in that
great.
calculation, you're taking into account not just where you're planting, but your walkways as well. And
Right.
so it's not exactly a 1 to 1. It's not exactly a 1 pound per square foot so much. It's actually more like 2 pounds per square foot because half your garden
Okay.
is going to be
If you
walkways.
figure out okay.
Mhm. But
So,
it's important to know those statistics because when I consult with people, a lot of times, they're starting with a blank slate and they want to get started. And I work with people all the time, also on they've already built a garden, and I come in and try to help them make it more
mhm.
manageable, and they've always overbuilt it. And one of the things I'm very passionate about is building a garden that fits your needs,
Mm-hmm.
because having enough is a blessing, but having too much is a burden as well, because you
Mm-hmm.
feel this need to do something with it. I don't grow all this food out here so I can feed it to my chickens if I have too much. It's very intentional. Everything we do is very intentional. And so if we're consulting with a family of four, then you have to look at like what the average person eats per pound of vegetables per year, which is about 200 to 400 pounds. And then you do the math, and that's the size of garden that you built, because you
Okay,
want to
so
keep it small enough that you can manage it.
so I want to anchor these points because they seem like more like golden or whatever pearls of wisdom,
Yeah.
that you want to start with the number of people that you have.
Correct.
And you said people typically, this is an adult, I would guess, eats, did you say
Right.
400 to
It,
800
it's
pounds?
two to 400
Two
pounds
to
per year
400.
per
Okay.
person. Hmm.
Okay. And so that would be um, maximum 400 square feet, including the walkways per
That's
person.
correct. That's right. So if you had a family of four and you
Mm-hmm.
use, let's say we use the average of 300 pounds per person, maybe you have two
Mm-hmm.
adults and two children or something, then you would have to build a garden that was 1,200 square feet to feed them for the entire year. And
Okay.
so that's a 30 by 40 garden.
Okay. So this is
Mhm.
really important to know. And of course, people in the beginning might not be getting that yield, but once
Right.
you get
Absolutely. Yeah.
going
Yeah.
along, and then also the other thing you said that I think is so important is the importance of having sufficient pathways.
Oh, yeah.
So I want
Yeah.
to move on down to your next garden because I
Yeah.
think that one was the one where you started to build in bigger pathways. Is that right? The second
Yeah.
garden that you had that was based on the documentary or the teachings in the documentary Back to Eden by Paul
Gotcha.
Gauchi.
Uh-huh.
Gauchi, is that how you say
That's
his
correct.
name?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And so that garden, you started using more mulch, right, to
Correct.
retain
Yeah.
the soil and the water in the garden.
Uh-huh.
And so, can you tell us about that one? Because that was like your next big iteration.
Yeah. And so when we moved from town to Plum, we went from 2 beds to 4 beds. And then the next year we went from 4 beds to 8 beds. And then we went from 8 to 16. And
Mm-hmm.
when we were getting to ready to go from that 8 to 16, and we weren't building separate gardens. We were expanding our current garden, because when we got to our property, my husband and I are both land surveyors. And so we map everything. We designed our garden in a way that we could start in one part of the yard and expand in the future. And I do
Mm-hmm.
encourage people to keep that in mind as well, because I've helped people who they'll build their garden in some little back corner of their yard and they can't expand it. And I always
Mm-hmm.
tell people to start small, get excited, decide if this is your passion or not. Like, is this your
Mm-hmm.
thing that you want to hone in on? And then expand after that. And so when we were ready to expand, we were going to double what we had. And it was too cost prohibitive to continue with the Mel's Mix method. And so, right about that time, we discovered this fabulous documentary, and we incorporated that when we expanded our garden. And so, a couple key things that we did: one, we didn't build any more sides to our beds. We decided that instead of spending all that money on the infrastructure to keep our raised beds, to keep that good soil contained, we would just raise the whole garden. And so I
Mm-hmm.
want to point out that it only takes 6 inches of good soil to grow anything.
Mm.
And I'm talking
Another
anything:
another
potatoes,
pearl of
carrots,
wisdom
beets.
here.
Yeah. And so people think they need all this soil, and you really don't. You really need 6 inches of good soil. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was actually cheaper to, so that the area that we were expanding was 36 feet by about 40 feet. And it was cheaper to just raise that whole area than it was to buy all the wood to build the beds and then fill the beds and then fill in the walkways in between. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's when we decided to, again, we didn't till. We had this great big patch of grass that we were going to turn into garden. And my kids were helping me. And because we were going to till, we had to do something about the grass. So because we live in Texas, we do get to garden year round, which is a huge blessing. But the biggest burden we ever have to deal with is grass. We have this grass with these ridiculously deep, 12 to 13-foot deep roots that is so
Wow.
difficult to get rid of. And when we had built our original garden, we had all these beautiful raised beds, but we had this grass growing between them, and it was constantly getting in the beds. And it was so much work. I spent more time dealing with my walkways than I ever did weeding my beds or doing anything else in the garden. And it was
Wow.
because of this grass. And so when we expanded the second time, we put down newspaper and then cardboard, and then we covered it with a third. And when I say a third, we went up 9 inches because we knew as the soil broke down, it would compact down to the 6 inches. So we did 3 inches of topsoil, 3 inches of compost, and 3 inches of mulch. And we started growing in that. And so I bet you're going to want to know the pros and cons of that method.
I would love to know. Yeah. And also, part of what I thought was really important when I looked at your book was a lot of people use cardboard, but the fact that you use the wet newspaper under the cardboard seems like this is another like golden tip.
Yeah, we call them light bulb moments at our house because they're so simple. And so I do want to touch on that real quick because this is something that's really pivotal. I mean, pivotal. So a lot of people think they're just gonna put cardboard down because they're just thinking about smothering that grass or whatever's underneath the cardboard. And that's true. If you're dealing with Bermuda grass like we have here in Texas, that Bermuda grass is just going to sit there and hibernate until that cardboard breaks down, and then it's going to start growing again. So what's really key is we go out there with a weed eater and we get the grass as low to the ground as we possibly can. And then we put the newspaper on top of that and we get it soaking wet. Because when you do that, then the newspaper collapses and it adheres to the ground, and you've taken out all those air pockets. So the grass is going to suffocate. Then you put your cardboard on top of that. And really, that's just more, it's really protecting the newspaper from breaking down rather than smothering anything. And then on top of that, you put all your soil. And I'm telling you, that key thing right there is probably the biggest takeaway I've learned since we started. And we kind of learned it by accident because somebody wasn't following instructions from my little crew of helpers, and they did it like I thought it was supposed to be cardboard first. And we did that, and somebody else did it. And when we looked at it and when we analyzed it and we saw that the section they were doing was handling the grass better, we realized like we were really onto something. And so, like I said, student of gardening, trial and error is everything that we do here.
That's really funny. And now I have a very mundane question, but in this age of digital information, where do you get all this newspapers?
Oh, it's actually a very beautiful thing. This gardening method is the best friend of the county recycle center. I mean, our county, I can get everything I need to build my garden from the county recycle center. But if you don't have a county recycle center that takes newspaper, then you can call newspapers, and they often have unsold past issues that they're happy to unload. So our town newspaper takes all the bundles of their old papers to the recycle center. So I can literally go there and just get stacks and stacks of pre-bundled newspaper. People always ask me about the chemicals in the newspaper ink. Is from an organic approach. It is an accepted organic approach. And almost all chemicals now used in newspapers are soy-based and not chemical-based. And so they're still plant-based. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I did a garden once where we were teaching classes for the community, and we had this huge pallet of cardboard donated by Whole Foods at the time because they get all of their so this if you don't have a county recycle center that has a lot of cardboard, you could think about a big box store
just
or big
reach out to any grocery store, any appliance store.
Yes.
So I think it's beautiful that we can take these things that are, looking to be recycled, and we can turn them into soil. And guess what worms eat? I mean, everybody knows that worms are an indication of your soil health. Worms eat newspaper. And so by having the newspaper there to smother the grass, you're also inviting all the worms.
Feeding your worms. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that I thought was very critical was that you've gone through an evolution, not just with your soil, not just with your types of beds, but also with your fencing.
Yeah.
And for anywhere that's rural, especially, protecting against the predators becomes essential. So could you describe that a little bit and maybe just for the sake of time, with the method that you ended up with and
Yeah.
why.
Yeah. So we started with fast and cheap, and we really paid for it in the end. Never use chicken wire to fence anything ever, is all I'll say about that. In the end, we ended up building a field wire fence that had 2 inch by 3 inch squares. It's poly coated, so it's hopefully not going to break down as fast, because we really had a bad experience with chicken wire breaking down and rusting and having holes in it. And
Mhm.
and we were really lucky. Anytime you have to stretch field wire, you have to build H braces, and it can become a very complicated process. Um, I can drive a T post all day long. I cannot dig a 4 foot post hole in my clay soil. It would be a lot of work. And I do almost all of our gardening, me or my children. And so I always wanted to develop methods that were female friendly, because
Mm.
in a lot of times and places, it's the women doing this work.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of people that got into homesteading, and they're so frustrated because their husbands have other things that they're interested in doing, and the garden's not one of them. And
Mm.
so I'm very happy to have found something that I could do myself. And so we used T posts, and we found the system called the wedge lock system. And it's just these little clips that you can put on a T post, and you can basically build an H brace that way. And it's very easy to use. Once we had the H braces up, it was very easy. We just took 2 2x4s and clamped them together to make a fence stretcher. And I put a chain around it and hooked it to my van and pulled it. And we could tie off the fence to the T post. And so we were able to build a really nice 6 foot tall fence very easily, just my children and I.
Do you already have a video on your website about your fence building?
We have the footage and we have the pictures. I just haven't put it all together yet. Yeah,
Okay.
there's a lot of really great content for our website that we don't have up yet. But the
Mm.
fence building is one. Also, our compost area, because, like I said
Mm.
before, compost is the key. Compost is the key to all of your garden success. And we learned a lot about compost along the way. And so we did have to go through last year and completely redesign and rebuild our compost area. And so I'd really like to get those pictures together to encapsulate all that we've learned just on compost alone, and the best ways to build it.
Well, even the pictures in your book, I had compost bin envy when I was looking at your
You should see our new
photographs.
ones.
Yeah, I'm can't wait
Yeah.
to see those.
Yeah.
And one of the tips in your book that I liked about the fence posts was it's a whole lot easier to whack a fence post down deeper than
Mhm.
it is to pull it out if you hit it in too far at
Yeah,
first.
yeah. That's funny that you caught on to that. Just trying to get them all the same height and stuff. I really like a clean garden. I like
Hmm.
things looking clean and looking neat. And so all of those little things become important. You don't want to look out there and see a fence with T-posts going all over the place.
Well, I imagine also if you're a land surveyor that
I
you
do.
know,
I have an
you're
affinity for straight lines and
that's right. Geometry. You're a
that's right.
geometry person. So in 2019, you expanded your garden again, and this
Yeah.
time it became 32 feet by 110 feet, I
Yeah.
believe, which is, I did the math, 3,520 square feet, which is
Very
just
good.
under a tenth of an acre.
Yeah.
And I understand that you decided to use 100% country mulch that you had delivered from a
Yeah.
local vendor. And there's a great picture of your kids standing on top of that load, that delivery of mulch. So, can you explain about mulch and this question about whether
Yeah.
mulch then needs to become composted and
Mhm.
how long that takes and how you do
Yeah.
that? And, if you buy it and you set aside
Yeah.
this bed somewhere with on top of your wet newspaper and your cardboard with your mulch on top, and then you just like leave it there for a year and water it, or how does that work?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a lot to unpack. You have a lot of questions there, and it's.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to back up to our second expansion real quick and talk about the benefits and downsides to
Okay.
the mix that we used of the compost, topsoil, and mulch.
Okay.
So mulch is really great at water retention.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I mentioned before about how it's all about returning those micronutrients and minerals to the soil.
Mm-hmm.
So trees have this wonderful ability, these deep tap roots, to reach way down in the soil and pull up nutrients that we just can't access in the top layers of our soil. And most people's soils are very depleted. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you've heard, like, if you compared an apple now to an apple like 100 years ago, it takes one apple from 100 years ago to equal 100 from nowadays, because the
Wow.
mineral content is just not there anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
that 200 to 400 pound average that people eat, that's considering you're eating nutritious food. If you're
Mm-hmm.
eating a bunch of vegetables that are nutritionally dead, you're going to have to double that. And so
Right.
for us, it's always been about creating very nutrient dense food. And
Mm-hmm.
so we want the most nutrients in our soil when we're growing our crops. And so that second garden, we had the compost, which was feeding it. We had the mulch, which was going to break down into compost, because the only difference between mulch and compost is 6 months.
Oh,
So
wow.
mulch is going to become compost, but it's like a slow feeding. It's like a time released vitamin, if you would.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the other part that we had was topsoil in that blend. And I don't know why we did that. We did that because we thought we needed to have soil. Um, I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't buy
Hmm.
soil, because typically when you're buying topsoil, it's almost dead.
Oh,
Okay, like
okay.
it's already almost had most of its nutrients taken out of it.
Wow, that's
So when
another
you're
good
buying,
tip. And I
yeah,
bet it's
when
expensive.
it is. Well, it's less expensive than compost for some
Oh,
reason.
okay.
Typically, just depending on where you are. We're close to several mushroom farms, and so you
Hmm.
can always get mushroom compost around here, because when mushroom growers grow on the strata that they use, they can only use it once, and then they have to
Mm-hmm.
filter out and get new. So it's actually really easy to get large amounts of compost around here.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't do that again. And so the third time we expanded our garden, I was doing a giant experiment. And so we went, at the
Hmm.
time that we expanded, our garden was already about 30 by 60. So we expanded again to create that full 110 feet. It was like 30 by 40 or 50. I just can't
Mm-hmm.
remember the rough numbers, but it was basically taking what we already had and totally doubling it. It was a large area.
Mm-hmm.
So back up a
Right.
second. When we did the first garden,
Mm-hmm.
$750 for those 4 beds, $750 again to double it. Okay, that's a lot of money, $1,500. When we did the second garden, we were able
Mm-hmm.
to do it for like $800. Okay, all the soil components that we bought. When we did the third garden, which was double everything that we
Okay.
already had, we did $350 for the mulch that we used. And so our county recycling
Wow.
center has,
So you
yeah,
doubled
it's
it,
a
and you
huge,
you doubled the size, but you halved the cost.
absolutely, yeah. And so
Sweet.
our county has this fabulous recycling program where the people in town, when they trim trees and stuff, the city will go around and pick it up, and they'll take it to the county recycle center, and then the recycling center grinds it into
Mm-hmm.
mulch. And so it's very easy for
Mm-hmm.
us to get $5 a yard. They'll just fill up your pickup truck, $5 a yard, all the mulch you want. And what's
Mm-hmm.
really nice about that is that you're actually getting trees. So if you buy bagged mulch, you're probably getting chopped up pallets, chopped up furniture, chopped up who knows
Hmm.
what that has all kinds of chemicals in it. And then they dye it all
Formaldehyde,
to be the
probably. Yeah.
same color. Yeah, formaldehyde especially. And then they dye it
Mm-hmm.
all to be the same color. You don't want any of that
Mm-hmm.
in your garden. And so if you're able to source like direct from the source, like if you see the pile of tree branches and you see the mulch next to it because you can see the chippers out there, or if you can get a tree company, a lot of places have tree trimming companies,
Right.
any of the power line companies. If you can call them and say, hey, come dump your loads at my house, then you could do this for free.
Mm-hmm. That's a great tip. Another great tip, pearl of wisdom.
Yeah, yeah,
Get tree mulch, get it
yeah.
from somebody
So
who's chipping it.
that's right. And I do want to say though, the only downside, so benefits and drawbacks to this third system that we use, where it
Mm-hmm.
was straight 100% mulch, 9 inches of mulch on newspaper and cardboard. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
We had all the mulch delivered. We rented a Bobcat in literally 2.5 hours. I did a farmer's market in the morning. We came home, spread that whole garden 2.5 hours, and went to a wedding that afternoon. So and
Mm.
it was amazing how fast it went. The downside to it is that we couldn't plant in it for a year.
Okay.
Okay. And trust me, I tried because I just had all this soil. I just thought I had to put some seeds in it. And my husband, he said, it's not going to work. And he was right, because
Mm.
the difference between mulch and compost is time. And so we had to allow that mulch to break down. It took a year for it to break down. And a year after that, It literally grew exactly the same as the Mills mix. It's production wise, it's just beautiful, beautiful soil. And so,
Okay, good to know. And my sense is, and tell me if this is correct, that it also depends on how much water you have in the area, because water is required to break down compost or mulch or anything. And so
sure,
like where you live, it's a pretty moist area. Where I live, it's really dry,
yeah.
that you have to water your mulch
Right.
also.
So there's different things that you could do to speed up that process. You could put alfalfa pellets on top. You want anything that has some source of nitrogen. If you had alfalfa hay, you could put that on top. You could put urine on top. You
Hmm.
could put all sorts of things that have nitrogen in it that would help
Hmm.
speed up that
Okay.
process if you wanted. Water, of course, helps speeds up that process as well. We get about 40 inches on average a year of rain where I'm at. But one of the things I want to point out about the mulch, it's so beautiful. So
Hmm.
mulch has this amazing ability to retain water. And I have
Mm-hmm.
this great factual data about that. So I have a neighbor behind me who had a garden half the size as me. And I was talking to her once and she was telling me that her water bill was like ridiculously high, hundreds of dollars. And I was just shocked. And I said, "What are you doing to have such a high water bill? There's two of them." And she said, "I'm watering my tomatoes." And I know people all around me that water twice a day in the summertime to keep their
Mm-hmm.
gardens alive. And at that same time, I'm watering once a week. And with a
Wow.
family of 8, our water bill was like $100 a month. And at the same time period, hers was like $600 a month. And it's because of the mulch-based garden. It's because that mulch naturally has this great ability. If it's too wet, it's going to hold onto the water. If it's too dry, it's going to hold onto the water. It's just amazing. I can't explain it. I can just tell you, I vouch for it. It 100% works.
So with the garden that you have now that
Mm-hmm.
started with the mulch that stood for a year, that's
Mm-hmm.
the one that's been the most water efficient, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You water that Mel's mix and there's the components in it that hold water, the peat moss and the vermiculite, that
Mm-hmm.
really helped it. And then our middle garden is probably the worst at retaining water because it
Hmm.
it didn't have as much mulch. And I've amended it over the years. I do add compost and mulch to my garden every year.
Mm-hmm. So you top dress since you're a no-till garden.
Absolutely. Uh-huh. Yeah. And I
Okay,
do
that's
real
good to
quick about
know.
the no-till thing. I just want everybody to understand this because I have a lot of difficulty getting people to understand why we don't till. If you look at a community, a town that's taken hundreds of years to build, right? And if you thought about a tornado coming through that town and destroying everything overnight, that's what tilling is like.
Mm-hmm.
Underneath the soil, we have this whole world, all these microorganisms, and they have air pockets and they have interconnections, and you've got fungal myzomes, all kinds of things that are interconnected and talking to each other. And
Mm-hmm.
when you come through with a tiller, you wipe all that out, and the whole system has to start building all over again. And so sometimes I'll talk to people who like they want to know what they could do different in their garden. I just tell them the first thing to do is just stop tilling.
Mm-hmm. Right. It would be like if you had a forest and you went through and just ripped up all the tree roots and then expect
Yeah.
the trees to survive.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And they actually feed each other too. They pass
Absolutely.
nutrients back and forth
They
through the
do.
roots.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think the same
Fascinating
thing is
studies
true.
coming out about that stuff now.
Yeah, it is really incredible. So, and I understand that now you have such a great yield that you actually sell at farmers markets, right? So you
We
have
do.
now like 3,000 pounds a year, and for
Hmm.
your 8 people in your family, you don't need
Yeah.
that much.
It's a little bit more now that I have 4 teenagers. They're eating a lot more, but we eat about 1,500 pounds a year, 1,000 to 1,500 pounds a
Mm-hmm.
year ourselves, and then so we have half of what we have we're able to sell
Mm-hmm.
to other people, and so it totally pays for our whole grocery bill. The things that
Wow.
we still have to buy, the toilet paper and the milk. I have 2 kids that work at a raw milk dairy, and so again, like you don't have to do all the things. You just have to know some of the other people that do. And
So it sounds like your garden is actually paying for itself with the extra.
absolutely. Yeah. And then
So
some. Yeah.
amazing. That's really amazing. Okay. So um, we've talked, I want to just, because we want to not take too much of your time and make this too long, but other than these pearls of wisdom that you have already shared, which I think are incredibly valuable and could save people at least a decade of trial and
Yeah.
error,
Yeah.
um, what, I mean, if there were one thing or two things that you wish you had known right from the beginning? Is there anything else that we haven't stated that you wish you
Yeah,
had known right from the beginning?
sure. One right from the beginning, I wish I don't. I know when you move to a new piece of property and you're going to homestead, you've got all these things that you have to do. And I tell people, number one, start your garden. Don't
Hmm.
even worry about fencing it. Go out there with your cardboard and your newspaper and your mulch and just put it down. And then let it sit for a year while you go take care of all these other projects. Because that's going to be the cheapest, easiest way to start a great garden with this fabulous soil. And so use time to your advantage in that situation. And I wish that I had known that because I would have done things differently. It's also very important your order of operations. And
Hmm.
so if you don't put the newspaper and cardboard down first and you put your 9 inches of soil on top of it that's going to break down and become 6, you you've just really made a lot of work for yourself. And I know
Hmm.
people that have done this. Like they didn't follow the order of operations that we really try to stress in the book. And they just created way more work for ourselves for themselves. And the reason we put all that stuff in that book was because we did things wrong ourselves. And then we had to go back and fix it. And it's a lot more work to fix it rather than to do it in the right order.
Right. And
And
so it sounds like, and I'm soaking this all up because we're going to be starting a new homestead
Mhm.
in the next 6 months, and I'm already thinking, well, do we truck in the soil? Do we this? Do we that? And so I'm thinking that okay, we can do two things in parallel. We can start a big garden with the mulch and let
Mhm.
it sit for when we
Mhm.
can get to a larger garden the subsequent year, and start a
Mhm.
smaller garden with a
Yeah.
current mix, and use that as like a pilot project to work out
Yeah.
our systems, and then
Yeah.
make it larger the next year with our
That's
mulched garden.
beautiful. And then in the future, you can use those beds for herbs. I really
Hmm.
like keeping the herbs out of the garden because a lot of those are they stay there all year long. And so
Hmm.
it's really better to have those separate. So in that case, I would use that now for vegetables, use it later for herbs.
That's
And so
great.
having a good plan is really important. But don't
Hmm.
don't spend so much time planning that you never get out and start planting.
Hmm.
And then the other thing I would really encourage people is to keep a journal. And so
Mm.
the only reason we were able to ever write the book is because I had spent 15 years keeping a journal of everything I've ever done. And this is like I keep all my notes in here. Literally every time I go out there, I've got maps and sketches and calendars and all sorts of things. And that's how you improve in your method from year to year because gardening is very geographical. And so what works for me, like my calendar and my varieties that work well for me here, may not work as well for you where you're at, but you'll have to develop that knowledge yourself. And the only way that you can harvest so much from such a small amount of space is to be very intentional. So I'm
Hmm.
always looking at the calendar. I'm always just doing a little bit consistently along the way so that my garden's always fully planted and fully maximizing its yield.
Hmm. That's great. And it reminds me that my stepfather was a food scientist at Cornell. That was
Oh,
his work. And so I saw him for years in the home garden that he
uh-huh.
had with my mother. He would document
Giant
everything.
laboratory. Yeah.
His notebooks were a thing of beauty, his
Yeah.
garden notebooks.
Yeah. And it's
So,
really important information. And just so you know, like the things that are really important are dates,
mm,
when you plant something and when you harvest something and how much you harvest. If you realize that you're only harvesting a half a pound of peas every year, and I'll tell you,
mm,
peas are the lowest producing plant there is. If
hmm.
you're not getting a huge yield, we won't grow it again. We're a
Right.
high production garden. I need a lot of vegetables to feed a lot of people. And that's what I'm concerned about. I don't do crazy, goofy niche things. I do what everybody eats. And if you pay attention to those times that you're planting and harvesting, then you'll know when that bed's going to become available to put something else in. And so that's what
Great.
I'm talking about, that intentionalness that you just have to constantly be thinking about what can I do next in the garden. I meet a lot of people who they build it and then they think they're done and they walk away. And like having a garden is kind of like having kids. Like it's just a continual investment of your
Hmm.
time and energy and thought process to reap all these beautiful benefits that we're so thankful for.
Right. And if you don't track it, like I remember there was one year that I planted some kind of an Asian green that was fantastic. It was like it
Yeah.
produced all summer. It was pest resistant. It was delicious. It kept reseeding into the fall. And then I hadn't kept the seed packet
Oh no.
of
Yeah.
what it was. And
Yeah.
I've never known what it was. I was like, so for years I've been like, oh, if I could just figure out what that thing was that I planted. So don't be like me, write it down.
Yeah.
So in closing, what would you say to someone who wants to grow some or maybe eventually all of their own food, but they feel overwhelmed or they feel daunted by getting started? What would you say to them?
I always tell people to start small, because if you start too much, again, it's like having children. Nobody starts out with 6 children, right? You have one child and you decide like, I can do this. And you slowly add to it because your heart grows. And that's how it is with gardening too. Start small, decide if you're going to love it or not. And I'm telling you, there is no better feeling than that salad you make with your own lettuce and your own tomato. I remember the joy we would have if we had a meal where we produced all parts of it. Like this was a once a year, like it was just a huge occasion. And now it's so, everything we eat comes from our property and we don't even think about it anymore. And we eat like kings. I tell you, farmers, what they lack in income from what they're doing, because growing vegetables is not a huge money making endeavor, but you get to eat like a king. You couldn't, the people that shop at the farmer's market couldn't buy all the vegetables enough to supplement their whole diet. They're buying things to have for a couple of meals, but nobody goes to the farmer's market and buys 100% of their vegetables for the week. You couldn't afford it. And so the people that take the time to do this, if you'll take the time to start small and then just gradually increase your knowledge and increase what you're working on, you'll love it. And it will not feel overwhelming. It will feel exciting and achievable. And in the end, you'll have so much that you're thankful for.
And delicious as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And your health is going to benefit and your physical is going to benefit. I remember when I got into gardening and I read that it was great exercise. And I remember thinking like, how hard could it be to poke some seeds in the ground? And let me tell you, it is amazing. It's amazing exercise.
Well, thank you so much, Brianne. This has been very inspiring and very informative, and I learned a lot that's personally useful for me.
Good.
So I appreciate your generosity in sharing all of your experience, and hopefully we'll be talking more again soon. I look forward to getting this out to our viewers and listeners.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.